Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to the very first of Wednesday night's folk tales or folk tales on Wednesdays. Don't think we've quite decided on what we're going to call this new venture yet, but I'm very excited about it, and judging from the feedback that I've had so far, a lot of you are very excited about it too. So I've been doing my research, and what I wanted to explain before I went any further, apart from saying Yom Tov, because you can have a good night as well as having a good day. You can have an Erev Tov or a Lila Tov, or any major kind of Tov really, but you can have a really good evening and you can have a good night as well, so it's all good. And I wanted to welcome all the new people. Hi, I hope you enjoy your stay here. You'll find that we are a lovely, friendly, loving, supportive bunch of people, and this is your safe haven, and that's what we call it here, the haven. And we talk about anything and everything. Mondays we're going to talk about general stuff, or anything specific that we'd like to discuss. Wednesdays we're going to have folk tales, and fingers crossed, everything's going to go fine for them. And Fridays, of course, is Friday night spooky sessions, where we have our scary tales and stories. So welcome and hi to everybody tonight, and hello to all the regulars, and hello to all the new ones, and just a general hello to everybody. Hope you like this new nail colour. It's called Mirror Shine, and I've never had a silver that looked quite that nice before on one coat only. And it doesn't say one coat, it actually says take 2 or 3, but that's just one coat, so I'm quite chuffed with that. Sorry, that's neither here nor there, it's just me rambling on as always. So we're going to make this about a half an hour video, because you can't just tell, a folk tale and then go off and just leave people hanging. We need to, talk about things. So as this is the first one, what I thought I would do is just give a basic background to folk tales and why we have them. And then I've picked a couple of tales, one from Norway and one from Wales, which is where I was born. But I only spent a short amount of time in Wales, only 18 months. But it was still, again, it's still where I was born. So that's one close to home for me and any other Welsh people in our haven. So I really do hope that you like them, because I'd not heard these stories before. And if there are any Norwegian people here, or anyone who is descended from Norwegian parents, grandparents, or what have you, you might be able to shed some light for me, or you might have heard them yourself before. So I've got 2 different pairs of glasses, one to read and one to have a look at the story from the laptop. So without further ado, I want to welcome you to Folk Tales on a Wednesday, and I really hope you enjoy it. So sit back, relax, and let me entertain you. So I'm going to read from my notes first. Okay? So, folk tales are stories passed down through the ages, and they're generally passed down from generation to generation through word of mouth. It's basically what they used to call an oral tradition. Somebody, you would have someone centuries ago, and they'd be sitting in their hut or their little house, or whatever dwelling that they'd built for themselves, and they sit around the fire, and somebody might play a bit of music, maybe on some kind of pipe or flute or something like that. Somebody might have a stringed instrument, you know, and of course the main entertainment would be storytelling. So that's your basic sort of scenario. And of course, what have we got today? Campfire stories. You know, when you go camping and then you're sitting at night time and you're roasting marshmallows and little sausages on the campfire. And of course, the favourite stories to tell, excuse me, are of course ghost stories and horror stories and things like that. Now, there are different kinds of folk tales. You've got fairy tales, tall tales, trickster tales, you've got myths, you've got riddles and legends. And there are also supernatural fairy tales, which I didn't realise, which include things like devil dogs, trolls. Remember, you know that old nursery story about Billy Goatgruff and the troll under the bridge? Well, that's originally a folk tale. There's stories about dragons, elves, pixies, dwarves, little people, leprechauns, vampires even, demons, just all manner of haunting creatures. And there are also fairy tales with morals to the story, and they range from stories for children right the way up to stories for adults. Some famous names that you'll know are like Aesop's Fables. There are stories by Hans Christian Andersen, from the Brothers Grimm as well. They all told different tales which had us absolutely spellbound as children. Now, some common and very famous fairy tales, you know, have been read for at least 200 to 300 years, and they're actually still read today. The likes of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, Jack and the Beanstalk, believe it or not, was actually based on a folk tale. The Little Goose Girl, the Frog King, and what actually stunned me, that apparently originally was a folk tale, was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And I didn't know that. You know, I just thought it was an ordinary little children's story that over here in the UK would, you know, probably have as a pantomime around about Christmas time and the New Year. Even the likes of Cinderella was originally a folk tale, but it was actually called The Little Glass Slipper. And I believe, if I'm right, if I remember correctly, it was one of the Brothers Grimm, or a collaboration between the Brothers Grimm, who wrote The Little Glass Slipper. Animal stories and folk tales are the most common, and they are actually the oldest form of folk tale. That was what they used to sit and talk about around the fire, would be stories about if they'd been hunting, and, you know, about the chase of the hunt. And you know what it's like when you're telling a story, you embellish things, and, you know, you get stronger, and, you know, whoever it's chasing, it either gets bigger or it gets smaller, it becomes more ferocious, or it's gentler than they thought it was going to be, you know. And then of course when somebody else passes the story on, they'll make little changes, and then before you know it, it's something probably blown out of all proportion. But with every telling, it becomes more and more intriguing, more interesting. These stories are part myth, part fable, and part fairy tale. So there's little bits of everything that draws them all together. And, you know, two examples of this, again, which blew me away and I didn't know, are The Three Little Pigs and Red Riding Hood. And I didn't realise that those are two of the oldest stories of all. And those of us who have children will know how many times, you've read those stories, to your own children. I know that when I had my daughter, we would cuddle up from her being just a baby, and I would tell her about Red Riding Hood and Goldilocks and Three Bears and Three Little Pigs and things like that. And she loved them. And of course, I just loved telling them to her. And then, of course, my son came along, just repeated the thing all over again. And of course, my daughter still loved it. So I had a great time with both the kids. And I'm sure a lot of you out there will have done something similar. All folk tales have a setting. They all have characters, and there's always a problem to be solved. So something will go wrong. So they'll have, you've got Jack and the Beanstalk, and Jack lives with his mother, and they're very poor. And, Jack's got to go out, and he's got to take the cow to be sold and what have you, so they can get some money so they can eat. And so that's the problem, is the fact that, they've got no money, and he's got to take this cow to market. And of course, we all know what happens in Jack and the Beanstalk. But I'm not going to spoil it now, because apparently there are different versions of Jack and the Beanstalk. So I'm going to try and find the one that is the least known, and then eventually tell you that one. And they always have to have a character that will come along and save them. Or there could already be a character in the story who will find some character trait that can help them save the day. And that was something else I didn't know. Like I said, did you know that Cinderella herself is a folk tale? And again, I didn't know that. But, it was sort of polished a bit more by the Brothers Grimm, but there has always been stories about rags to riches and poor girls into princesses, and looking for their Prince Charming, or waiting to be swept off their feet by a knight in shining armour. Stories like this, girls have daydreamed for centuries about, oh, will someone come away and take me away from all this? And it's amazing just how far all these stories go back. So like I said, it was originally called The Little Glass Slipper by the Brothers Grimm, and that was put into their folk tale, I think it was their fairy tale collection, called Grimm's Fairy Tales, and that was published in 1812. So that's more than 200 years ago. So you've got folk tales. They actually fall into 4 basic categories: fairy tales, fables, trickster tales, and why stories. So you've always got one, well, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And then, of course, it'll eventually explain to you. And there's always the moral of the story. Fairy tales always end happily. Always. There's always a happy ending. So Cinderella's a happy ending. Red Riding Hood, happy ending. Three Little Pigs, happy ending. It's just how it is. In fairy tales, animals have voices that can be heard. They can talk to you. You can talk to them. You can understand them. They can understand you. And that's a very common feature in folk and fairy tales. And your wishes always come true. Always. So I quite like the sound of that, where you've got something where there's always a happy ending and your wishes always come true. If you're hearing a creaking door, those are my cats just going backwards and forwards. That's what they do. It's not a ghost, it's the cats. So now I've done that little bit of background for you, and we all sort of know where we are heading for. I'm now going to read you your first story once I've had a little drink, because honestly, it's been a nice day today. It's actually been quite sunny, but it's been particularly humid and sticky, and I don't know why, but I've just been thirsty all day. So please excuse me. And I wish I could tell you this was a drink, it's just lemonade. I ought to try and stay awake. Now, here's the first story. And like I say, this one comes from Norway. I don't know when it was written, to be honest with you, because I couldn't find out that information. I know that it's a Norwegian fairy tale. There's a collection of them all put together by Peter Christian Asbjørnsen and Jørgen Moe in a book called Norwegian Folk Tales. But like I said, I'm sorry I don't have the date of when it was written. But anyway, here's the basic story for you. This is called Boots and the Troll. Well, there was an old man and an old woman, and they had 3 sons. Well, unfortunately, the old man and the old woman caught a sickness, and they passed away. And the 3 sons, had to find a way to, bring some money in and look after themselves. So they all set out to seek their fortune. Well, the 2 older sons wouldn't have anything to do with the youngest son, because they said, he was absolutely fit for nothing. He was useless. They just had no time for him. They would just laugh at him. Anytime you wanted to do something with him, they pushed him away, scorned him, was like, no, don't want to know you. And they would go off and do their own thing and leave him all on his own. So anyway, these 2 are going into the nearest city, and they're looking what jobs can be found. And the youngest boy brought with him a kneading dough, and it was like a trough that you would knead dough in, sort of like a cross between sort of like I would imagine an oval kind of bowl. And apparently it was the only thing that his parents had left behind. So he decided that he was going to take this kneading, it's called a kneading trough in this story, so that's what I'll call it. So he took the kneading trough with him when he left the house. And, his brothers hadn't bothered with taking anything from the home. They went to a local castle, and it was where a king lived, and his brothers, one of them got a place underneath the head coachman, and the other one got a place as a gardener. And the youngest one, he got a job in the kitchen. Well, he did so much better than they did, so they got really, really envious of him. And the one under the coachman told him, he said he could get the king, his little brother was so clever that he could get the king 7 silver ducks that belonged to a troll. And this is something that the king had always wanted. So the coachman then went and told the king, oh, this boy in the kitchen, who makes the bread that you love, he can go and get these 7 silver ducks that you've always desired. So when the king insisted that he do it, the youngest son said, I need some wheat and I need some rye, and then I'll be able to go and do this for you. And I need a boat to row over the lake. So the king said, that's fine, take what you need, but you better bring back these 7 silver ducks. So the boy took the wheat, he took the rye, he got a little rowboat, he rowed over the lake, and he took his kneading trough with him to the troll's place, and he lowered the ducks into the trough using the grain. Well, then his brothers told the coachman, well, he's done that now, and he's managed to get the silver ducks for the king. I know what we'll do. We'll tell the coachman that he can steal the troll's bed quilt. And that's something else that the king had always wanted, because it was threaded through with silver and gold. So the coachman went back to the king, told him the same story. The same boy who got you the 7 ducks, he can go and get you this troll's bed quilt. So the king sent for him and said, can you do this? And he said, yes, your majesty, but I just need 3 days. Give me 3 days and I'll bring it to you. So here he goes. He's got use of the boat again, goes back in the boat, rows across the lake, and he saw the bed quilt being hung out to air. So the troll had obviously, aired his bedding, put the quilt, there I go again. He put the quilt over the washing line to air it out. The boy sees him do this, watches the troll walk away, creeps up behind him, steals the quilt, and then put it in his little boat and took it back to the king. Well, the king was so pleased. This time he rewarded the boy and he made him his own body servant. So this really put his brother's noses out of joint, because one of them was still working underneath the coachman and the other one was still being a lowly gardener, and they weren't advancing at all. And that really got the jealousy thing going, as these things tend to do. So they went to the coachman this time and they said, our brother who got the 7 silver ducks? Mm-hmm. And then he got the troll's quilt, yeah. He said, well, he can go and steal the troll's golden harp. That's the one that when you play it, it makes everyone happy and glad. He can do that. Can he do that? Oh, yeah. He was able to do the other things easily. He can do this. So the coachman then goes up to the king and he says, your majesty, here's the thing. He got you the ducks, he got you the quilt, but apparently he can go and get you this harp, that when you play it, everyone in the land will be happy and glad. So the king's like, I want this, because then I will be the greatest king that ever lived. The one that made everybody happy. I will be that man. I want this. So he sent for him and he said, I hear you can go and get me this golden harp. Golden harp? He said, yes, the golden harp. You can go and get that from the troll, can't you? Yes, your majesty, I can, he said, quickly thinking on his feet, thinking, what golden harp is this? But he thought, no, I'll go for it. So he said, the only thing is, your majesty, this time I'm going to need 6 days. 6 days? Well, yes, this is a little bit more, complicated. I will get it for you. I just need 6 days. Right, well, okay then, he said, but mind, you better get it done. He said, because if you manage to get this for me, he said, there is a very big reward. Not only will I give you the hand of my daughter in marriage, the princess, not only will you get her, who's the most beautiful girl in the kingdom. Well, they always are, aren't they? All the princesses are always really gorgeous. Not only that, but I'll give you half the kingdom. When I'm gone, obviously, you're not getting it until I'm gone. But when I'm gone, you can marry my daughter. Well, you can marry my daughter when you bring me back this harp, and I'll give you half the kingdom, which you won't get until I'm gone. So the boy thinks, I'm going to give it a damn good go. So he gets in his boat, he rows over the lake, but this time he takes with him a big thick nail, a birch pin, which I think is a big thick thing made out of wood, and a taper end. So that's obviously, a end of like a long piece of wood, or probably some kind of candle, that sort of thing, you know. So anyway, this time he got out the boat, he's got his things with him, but this time he let the troll see him. And the troll went absolutely berserk and he captured him. And what he decided to do was he's going to take this boy and he put him in a little wooden cage, like a pen. He's going to put him in this pen and he's going to fatten him up. He's going to feed him and he's going to fatten him up, because trolls ate humans. They were cannibals, you see, especially in this story, they're cannibals. And he did this, and after about a couple of days, the troll goes in and sort of pokes him, gets him to pull out his finger, and he feels his finger to see if he's getting any fatter. Well, on one particular day, the boy pushed the nail out for the troll to feel. The troll seems to be happy enough with that, although why, I don't quite know. Next day he goes to check on the boy. This time he pushes the birch pin through the pen, bits of stick around the pen. The troll seems quite happy with that. The next day he pushes through the taper end. And at this point the troll says, "You're fat enough. You're going to be ready to be cooked and eaten now." So the troll went and he invited a whole load of guests to come so they would have a feast. And he told his daughter to go and slaughter the boy. So she went and she took a large knife and she went into the pen and she said, "Just, let's make this easy for each other. I'm going to slaughter you because you're going to be eaten." And the boy told her and he said, "I just had a quick look at your knife. That's not sharp enough. That'll not get through my neck. That'll not get through any part of me. If you want me to have a quick and easy death, so you can have a quick and easy dinner, you're going to have to get that knife sharpened." And she went, oh, yes, you're right. Yes, you are. You're right. So she went and got a whetstone and she started sharpening the knife. She go backwards and forwards with this whetstone, with this knife. And he said to her, "Look, I know I'm going to die anyway, but shall I give you a hand?" And she went, "You know what, you're being really good about this. You don't get many like you." And he says, "I bet you don't." And he said, "I'll give you a hand." So he takes the knife, he sharpens it a few times like that, takes the whetstone out, holds it up and he says, "Yes, I think that's sharp enough." And he grabs the girl, gets the knife and slices her head off. Clean off. So he then got her body, chopped it in half. He roasted one half in the nearby fire, and then he took the other half and he boiled it in a pot. And then he quickly dressed up in her clothes, put a little hood round his head and sat in the corner of the pen. And the troll came in and he said, "Oh, you've done a really good job here. You've done it exactly the way I wanted it to be cooked. You've roasted one half and you've boiled the other one. That's really, really good." And he said, "Let me have a taste of it." So he tasted some of the roasted bit and he tasted some of the boiled bit and he went, "That's really, really tasty. You've done a really excellent job here. Well done." He said, "I'm going to have some." And the boy, which is dressed as the girl, says, "Oh, thank you. I feel too sad. I'm just too sad. I might have some later." So the troll said, "I know it'll make you feel happier. Go and get the harp and play that. That'll make you feel happy and glad. So, you know where it is, don't you? I think I do. I can't remember because I'm too sad. Says, well, I'll tell you where it is. So you told her where the heart was. And the boy goes off, he grabs the harp, and then he decides, I'm off now. So he got everything he needed and he ran to the boat. Well, the troll saw him, shouted after him, and the youth turned back and said to him, you are not going any further because you had just eaten your own daughter. I killed her, I roasted half of her, and I boiled the other half, and you've just eaten her and enjoyed her. Some kind of dad you are. And, you know, the troll just got so angry and upset and bewildered and overwhelmed with the news that he'd actually eaten his own child that he burst. He just burst. Because that's what Norwegian trolls do, apparently. When they get overwhelmed, they just burst. And he just clean burst. So the boy goes back, takes all of his gold, all of his silver. He goes in his boat, goes back to the king. He says, Your Majesty, one harp, one pile of gold, one pile of silver, princess, please. And the king said, fair do, that's what we agreed. So the boy won the princess's hand in marriage and half the kingdom. And his brothers were seen as absolute troublemakers, and they were sent out to be soldiers to fight in a battle, and unfortunately they died. And that's what happened to his brothers. But the youngest boy, who I think, you know, was quite a nice lad all in all, apart from troll killing and boiling girls and things like that, him and his princess, and he automatically became a prince, lived happily ever after, and they eventually became king and queen, and had the golden harp, and all the land was happy and glad. And that's that story. And I hope that you've enjoyed it. Now, I've noticed we've got to half an hour, so I'm going to very quickly, tell you the story of the Fairies of Cargogan, which is a Welsh folk tale. Once upon a time, a lot of fairies lived in Mona. One day, the Queen's fairy daughter, who was now 15 years old, told her mother she wanted to go out and see the world. The Queen said, yes, I'll allow you to go for one day, and you have to change from a fairy into a bird and then to and fro all day long as you wish. So when the girl came back one night, she said, Mummy, I've been to a gentleman's house, and as I stood listening, I heard the gentleman was ill-wished. He was very ill and crying out in pain. Oh, I must look into that, said the Queen. So the next day, she went through a process and she found that he'd been witched by an old witch. So the following day, she set out with 6 other fairies, and when they came to the gentleman's house, she found that he was very ill. Going into the room and bearing a small blue pot that they had brought with them, the Queen asked him, would you like to be cured? Oh, bless you. Yes, yes, indeed. So the Queen put the little blue pot, and it was filled with perfume, onto the centre of the table. She lit it, and the room was suddenly filled with this beautiful scent. It was beautiful. Well, while the perfume was burning, the 6 fairies formed in a line behind her, and she leading, they walked around the table 3 times, chanting in chorus, round and round, 3 times 3, we have come to cure thee. And at the end of the third round, she touched the burning perfume with her wand, and then she touched the gentleman on the head, saying, "Be thou made whole." No sooner had she said the words than he jumped up hale and hearty, and he said, "Oh, dear Queen, what shall I do for you? I'll do anything you wish." "Well, money I do not wish for," said the Queen, "but there's a little plot of ground on the sea cliff I want you to lend me, for I wish to make a ring there, and the grass will die when I make the ring. Then I want you to build 3 walls around the ring, but leave the seaside open, so that we may be able to come and go easily." "With the greatest of pleasure," said the gentleman, and he built the 3 stone walls at once, as the spot indicated. Well, near the gentleman lived an old witch, and she had the power of turning in at will into a hare. You know, a hare's like a massive rabbit. The gentleman was a great hare hunter, but the hounds could never catch this hare. It always disappeared in a mill, running between the wings and jumping in at the open window, and though they stationed 2 men and a dog at the spot, when it immediately would turn into the old witch. And the old miller never suspected, for the old woman used to take him a peck of corn to grind for her every few days before any hunt, telling him that she would call for it on the afternoon of the day of the hunt, so that when she arrived she was expected. Perfect foil, yeah? Well, one day she'd been taunting the gentleman as he returned from the hunt that you could never catch a hare, they are too fast. And he struck her with his whip, and he said, "Get away from me, you evil old witch." Whereupon, that was when she ill-wished him, and he fell ill, but as you've seen now, he's been cured. When he got well, he watched this old woman and saw that she often visited the house of an old miser who lived nearby with his beautiful niece. Now, all of the people in the village touched their hats and they just sort of bobbed respectfully whenever they saw the old miser, because they knew that he had dealings with this old witch, and they were just as much afraid of him as they were of her. So they always made sure that they tapped their forelock and doffed their caps, and the ladies would curtsy and "Morning, afternoon, sir," and what have you, and they always treated him with the utmost respect. But everyone, absolutely everyone, they loved his niece because she was beautiful and she was kind and she was helpful, thoughtful, you know, just sort of thing that people like that do. They're just nice. So when the fairies got home, the Queen told her daughter, "I have no power over the old witch for 12 months from today. And then I have no power over her life. She must lose that by the arm of a man." So the next day, the Queen's daughter was sent out again to see if she could find a person suited to that purpose. And in the village lived a crofter who was afraid of nothing. He was the boldest man in the village. And one day he passed the miser and he didn't doff his cap or tug at his forelock or anything like that. He just walked straight past him. Well, the old fellow was absolutely enraged that he'd been treated so disrespectfully. So he goes off to see the witch, and he told her what had happened. And the witch said, "Oh, I see, okay, I'll settle his cows tonight." She said, "I'll settle them." So she ill-wished the cows, and they were all taken sick, and they couldn't give any milk that night. So the fairy's daughter arrived at this guy's home after the cows were taken ill, and she heard him say to his son, a bright lad, "It must be that old witch. That's who's done this." And when the Queen's daughter heard this, she went back to the Queen, and the Queen said, "Bring him to me." So the man went to see the queen and told her what had happened, and the queen said, do you want them cured? Yes. So the next day she took 6 fairies, she went to his home with a blue pot of perfume, and she said, you definitely want your cows cured? He said, God bless you, yes, yes please. She then made him bring a round table into the yard. She placed the pot of blue perfume on the table, lit it as before, and the fairies all formed in line and walked around the table 3 times, saying, round and round, 3 times 3, we have come to cure thee. Then she dipped the end of her wand into the perfume and touched the cows on the forehead, saying to each one, be thou whole. Oh, he was absolutely overjoyed. He really was. He was so happy. He said, oh, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? Just tell me what you want and I'll do it. She said, well, money I don't care for. She says, all I want is your son to avenge you and me. Well, the young lad jumped up and he said, whatever I can do for you, my lady, I will do it. She said, I want you to be at the walled plot the following day at noon. Be on time, and I will see you there. The next day at noon, the queen and her daughter and 300 other fairies came up the cliff to the green grass plot, and they carried a pole and a tape and a mirror. When they reached the plot, they planted the pole in the ground and they hung the mirror on the pole. The queen took the tape, which measured about 30 feet, and fastened it to the top of the pole, and then walked round it in a circle, and whenever she set her feet upon the grass died. And then the fairies followed up behind the queen, and each fairy carried a harebell in her hand, and a little blue cup of burning perfume in the right. So the harebell flower in this hand, little blue pot in this hand. And when they formed up behind the queen called that young lad to her side, and she told him to walk by her all the way round. She was going to cast this spell. And they all began to sing, round and round, 3 times 3, tell me what you see. And when they finished the first round, the queen and the lad stopped before the mirror, and she asked the lad, what can you see? He said, I see, the mirror tells me it is the witch that I see. So they marched round again, singing the same words as before, and they stopped a second time, and the queen again said, what can you see? I see, the mirror tells me it is a hare that I see. So the third time with the ceremony, and the question was repeated. He said, I see, the mirror tells me the hare runs up the hill to the mill. And then the fairies, pole, mirror and all, vanished. And the only thing that was left was that empty ring on the ground, all the withered grass. Well, on the appointed day, the lad went to see the queen, and she appeared, and she gave him a sling and a smooth pebble from the beach, and said, I have blessed your arms, and I have blessed the ring, the sling, and I have blessed the stone. Now, as the clock strikes 3, go up the hill near the mill, and in the ring stand still, till you hear the click of the mill. Then with thy arm, with power and might, you shall strike and smite the devil of a witch called Jezebel Light, and you shall see an awful sight. Well, the lad did as he was told, and presently he heard the huntsman's horn and all the hue and cry, and he saw the hare running towards the opposite hill, where the hounds seemed to gain on her, but she turned round on the hill, and then she seemed to gain back, turn around and going round and round in circles. And as she came up towards the mill, he got the pebble in the sling, swooshed it round, and he threw the stone, and it smacked her right in the skull. It lodged there, and he ran up to her and found the witch lying there, dead. He killed her. And as the huntsmen came up, they crowded round him and they praised him. Good lad, you've killed the witch. And they fastened her body to a horse with ropes and dragged her to the bottom of the valley, where they buried her in a ditch. And that night, when the old miser heard of her death, he dropped down dead on the spot with shock. And as the lad was going home, the queen appeared to him and told him to be at the fairy ring the following day at noon. Next day, all the fairies came with the pole and the mirror, each carrying a harebell in her left hand and a blue cup of burning perfume in the right, and they formed up as before, and the lad walking beside the queen. They marched round, repeated all the old words, and the queen stopped before the mirror and said, "What do you see?" I see, the mirror tells me it is an old plate cupboard that I see. So they went around a second time, saying the same words again. I see, the mirror tells me the back is turned to me. So the third time went around, said the words, and then he said, I see, the mirror tells me a spring door is open to me. By that plate cupboard the misers sail, said the queen, and she and her fairies disappeared in a flash. Well, on the day of the auction sale of all the things from the miser's house, all the things were brought out into the road, and the plate cupboard was put up for sale. The lad saw it, he recognised it from seeing it when he was with the queen and the fairies, and he bid for it and he bid for it until it was sold to him. Well, he paid for it, he took it home in a cart, and when he got it into his house, he examined it, and he found there was a secret drawer, and in that drawer it was filled with gold. And the following week, the house and the land, 30 acres, that was put up for sale, and the lad bought them as well. He married the miser's niece, and they all lived happily ever after. And that is the end of that story. So tonight I've been able to bring you one from Norway and one from Wales. Next week I'm going to look for maybe 3 or 4 stories, because we've got the introduction out of the way, and I know I've run over time. I am sorry about that, but it is our first night, so I hope you can forgive that. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I've actually had a great time doing this, and I hope you have liked the way I've read the stories. If you've got any stories that you want me to tell, please just put them in the comments, or you can send me a message through Twitter. My handle is always in the description box, and I'm more than happy to either tell the stories for you, or you can put them in a big comment and I'll pin them for you so everybody else can read them. So on that happy note, I will say thank you so much for coming to our very first Folk Tales on a Wednesday. I do hope you've enjoyed them. You really made my night, and I look forward to seeing what you say in the comments. And for those of you who love our Friday nights, I will see you on Friday night, and I will see the rest of you on Monday. So thank you again, and good night, and I love you all. Bye bye.